They've done it. The Biden administration has done it. They have outright said that you are racist if you discriminate against criminals. And let's break that down for a second. The convenience store chain Sheetz, with hundreds of outlets in 6 states, has been hit with a discrimination lawsuit by the EEOC under Biden. They said that requiring a criminal background check is racist. I'm going to let that one sink in for a minute for you. They called Donald Trump a white nationalist. And it is the EEOC under Joe Biden that is saying, and I'm going to stress this again, if you apply for a job and that job requires a criminal background check, they're discriminating against non-white people. Okay, they're flat out saying white people have a lower crime rate. Wow. Now, I'm sure the left will come up with some convoluted explanation and conspiracy around white privilege as to why this makes sense. They'll say something like, white police officers disproportionately target people of color, and therefore they're more likely to have high crime rates. And see, it's not about them being criminals. It's about the fact that if a white guy and a black guy commit the same crime, the black guy goes to jail. And therefore, when he applies for a job, he ain't going to get it. Well, there certainly is some truth to that. It is true. I think the issue has more to do with perhaps underlying biases, crime rates, and neighborhoods. If there's a neighborhood that is high crime and a cop sees a guy committing a crime, he's likely going to be like, okay, we're taking action. But this has been changing somewhat. Or they're more likely to investigate a crime under the assumption it's a high crime neighborhood. So let's put it this way. Let's say there's 2 people. One guy's in a better off, higher wealth neighborhood. One guy's not. This is going to confer a few presumptions. If the neighborhood is lower income, it's got a higher likelihood of being non-white. That's stats. I'm not saying it has anything to do with being with racial. The left argues it's white privilege. It's prejudicial. Not so much the right. The right, I don't think puts a racial component to it. But certainly there are elements of like far right white nationalists who absolutely do. But so the idea is basically if a cop sees a guy in a low crime neighborhood committing a crime, he might not know exactly what's going on. He might not investigate. He might not think anything of it. And it's not so much that it's white people. It's just there's not a lot of crime in the area. And so nothing ends up happening. But in an area with lots of crime, they see a guy looking around, they stop him. And then what happens is because these areas tend to be lower income and tend to be non-white, you will get these stats. But look, I'm not going to argue. I'm not a sociologist or an anthropologist. I'm just going to say this. The Biden administration is effectively saying outright that there's a direct correlation between being a convicted criminal and being not white. Okay. Like Ben and Jerry's did this. It was wild. Ben and Jerry's put out a tweet that said something like, despite making up only 13% of the population, black people make up like some large percentage of the prison populations. And I was like, yo, can I just say, I don't know what if reason behind it matters. The left attacking Zionists, you've got white nationalists attacking Zionists. Then you've got just general anti-Zionist right, which is different. And there's like this weird horseshoe overlap of ideologies, but still like, I don't know, it's just weird. Here's a story from NBC News. The Sheetz convenience store chain has been hit with a lawsuit by federal officials who allege the company discriminated against minority job applicants. Well, how did they do that? Joe Biden stopped by a Sheetz for snacks this week. That's right. He wanted his black and white milkshake. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission filed a suit in Baltimore against Altoona, PA-based Sheetz and 2 subsidiary companies, alleging the chain's long-standing hiring practices have a disproportionate impact on minority applicants and thus run afoul of federal civil rights law. That's right. If you don't hire criminals, you're in violation of the law. Sheetz said Thursday that it does not tolerate discrimination of any kind. And this is where I get to I don't know if I would stick up for Sheetz. I like Sheetz. They're in our area. We have a whole bunch. We go to them all the time. But they said, diversity and inclusion are essential parts of who we are. We take these allegations seriously. We've attempted to work with the EEOC for nearly 8 years to find common ground and resolve this dispute. Nick Ruffner said in a statement. The privately held family company has more than 23,000 employees and operates convenience stores and gas stations in PA, West Virginia, Maryland, Ohio, North Carolina. The lawsuit was filed in federal court on Wednesday, the day Biden stopped at a Sheetz market to get his milkshake. All right. They say, let's break this down. First, here's a quote. Federal law mandates that employment practices causing a disparate impact because of race or other protected classifications must be shown by the employer to be necessary to ensure the safe and efficient performance of the particular jobs at issue. Even when such necessity is proven, the practice remains unlawful if there is an alternative practice available that is comparably effective in achieving the employer's goals but causes less discriminatory effect. What would that be? Hiring extra security guards? So let's break this down, okay? EEOC has been probing Sheetz for a long time. They say it's racist. Here's the question. Why is it that statistically we see higher crime in minority neighborhoods? Why is it statistically that the federal government has made that assessment? The question then falls into two camps, the racist camp and the racist camp. It's just you're racist one way or the other. The only way you can look at it is through the lens of being racist, I guess. It's not completely. I do think there's a class issue. But let's talk about the white nationalist sort of view. I don't know if white nationalist is the right way to put it. White identitarian. That's probably a better way to put it. White identitarian views are that different minority groups have a higher rate of crime because inherent within them is a higher rate of crime. Period. Thank you. Have a nice day. I don't believe that. I don't think that's true. And what I mean by that is I grew up on the south side of Chicago, man. I'm in an area that's like mostly white and the same crime exists. Gangs, drugs, all that stuff. And we had multiracial gangs. You know, you had like a Polish immigrant hanging out with the Mexican guy and a black guy, and they were all in a gang together, stealing, beating, and robbing people. You see, it was a utopia. But what I think is, while there are certainly characteristics among different bodies of people, because I assume most things are heritable, the question is race the determinant factor? And I don't think that's fair. The reason why is a guy from Haiti and a guy from, Somalia, very different people. What do they have in common? They have dark skin. That doesn't work. It does not work. Let's try this. A Southern Frenchman and a Norwegian guy. They're both white. Very different people. Very different. And Italian too. So the issue I take is if they just say a black person, it's like, well, hold on, man. You can't make the assumption that black people or Latinos are predisposed towards insert whatever category because they differ between actually different ethnicities and the skin color is not, it's less relevant. I don't think it's relevant. And so the question then becomes for the left, are white people conspiring to harm black people? And for the white identitarians, it's are non-white people more violent? Either way, there's a racial component to it. And I'm sitting here kind of like, I don't know if skin color, the immediate lens of race, is the appropriate way to view this. And I also think it excludes class. There's a big argument about whether or not poverty creates crime. It does. The question is it the predominant principal factor? And I think it's fair to also say that crime causes poverty. Correlation and causation. A lot of people fall into the camp of thinking that if you have an area that is poor, you're likely going to see higher rates of crime of some sort. And that may be. While others say if you have areas with high crime, they will become poor. I think that's true too. So here's what I see in the United States. And I believe this is fair and fact. And I believe the left goes about it all wrong. I like to use St. Louis as a really good example of what happens. But we can just go back and keep it really, really simple. Slavery ends. The government promises the slaves 40 acres and a mule. They don't get it. There's no reparations. Many black people now think that after all this time, descendants of slavery deserve reparations. I disagree. However, when you have a class of people that share very much widely a skin color, a race, though they're from different countries ancestrally, but they have no generational wealth. What we're talking about is hundreds of years of typically white generational wealth. This country was 90% white in the 50s. Majority white generational wealth, because even if, like a white dude hands a car to his kid, they're inheriting what their parents leave behind. For those that were brought here through slavery, not so much. There's a lot less to hand down, and thus higher rates, or I shouldn't even say higher rates of poverty, but a disparity between wealth received through generations based on black or white. That doesn't say a lot about Latino populations, but many of them being immigrants to this country does confer something similar. So what you end up with is, for these reasons, white areas have more wealth than Hispanic and black areas. What then ends up happening, St. Louis being a good example. In St. Louis, this country is 90% white. The United States begins to outlaw, like, hey, you can't discriminate against people based on race. So outside of St. Louis, enclaves formed. Families would move to an area, buy up land, build houses, and then create covenants saying no more houses are allowed to be built in our town. It was, in essence, keeping out any non-white person. Whether intentional or otherwise, some historians argue it was intentionally white flight. This ended up creating something like 99 cities in St. Louis County. Now what happens is you have counties that are predominantly black with low wealth, and what you'll get is, I've talked about it quite a bit, so for those that haven't heard it, for those that have, you've heard this, they call it going on tour. I did a documentary about it. 20-year-old black dude lives in a predominantly black area. He drives to work. He's an honest guy, works an honest job, but he's relatively poor. His license plate expires. This was actually someone we met. This happened to them. License plate expired, and he has to drive, like 10 miles to work. And he's thinking to himself, rent, gas, or $35 for the license plate. He's like, dude, I don't have $35. It's like, I make $9 an hour at the time. It's like $9 or $10 an hour. And at the end of I gotta pay for food. I gotta pay for rent. I gotta pay for insurance. And he's like, the $35, I can't do it. He drives from home to work, and he goes through 4 different cities because they're very small cities, each with their own police department. And when he does, he gets pulled over in one. Cop says, $50 ticket, you didn't get your license plate renewed. He drives to the next one. $50 ticket, you didn't get your license plate renewed. And so here's this one dude with one infraction, he gets 4 tickets. So now we'll find that was $50, it's not $200. He can't pay that. After a while of not paying it, they say the penalty for not paying the fine, a moving violation and not renewing your plate, it's 1 day in jail. That's not a big deal, right? 1 day in jail. As soon as he gets out, the next city's police department is waiting to pick him up. And so they call it going on tour. And they're like, this happens a lot where you'll get like, it's really much driving with like a busted headlight, or, something happens where your license plate expired, your headlight's out. You end up getting these moving violations, tinted windows, something like that. Not so much tinted windows. That's a choice. You can roll your windows down. But what ends up happening is you have a group of people that have been historically disenfranchised, struggling to make it through something. This is what I often talk about when I talk about systemic racism. The problem is, now let's get to the problem, because those things all exist. The problem then becomes the left saying that the solution is racial discrimination. Yeah, nah, it's not. Because then what happens is, nowadays, this is why I don't agree with reparations. Nowadays, you got white people who live in these neighborhoods too. And so it may be mostly black, but white people live there. And for the white people who live there too, you can't have a system where you go to this neighborhood of poor people who are all experiencing the same thing, even the white people, and then go, not only the black people get reparations. Because now the reparations come, benefit one racial group, and there's another racial group there in the midst with nothing. The way I put it to people is like, I can certainly recognize racial discrimination. Redlining in Chicago created big problems. What they did was, redlining was, there's the red line train. And so the realtors were like, the real estate agents said, when we get offers from black people, we're going to tell them, oh, these areas, and we're going to funnel them all in to the red line area. They did that. And that created, pockets of predominant, like racialized things. It was racialized already, I should say, but it created enclaves. You also had blockbusting. Bro, let me tell you about blockbusting. Blockbusting is when, because this country, like, people are racist. Like, legit. Not the leftist kind of everyone's racist. I think we've done away with a lot of that. But let's go back in time. People are racist. And so what happens is the real estate companies, knowing that white people were scared of black people, they would go to a neighborhood, real estate company would buy a house, rent it to a black family at a premium rate. So the black family is thinking like, wow, we're getting this great deal. The real estate agents would then go to the white people and say, do you see who just moved in? There goes the neighborhood. And the white people would then be like, we're going to sell. The real estate company would then buy the properties at a slightly reduced rate because the white families were like, we're not going to be able to sell if black people move in. And then what would happen is the real estate companies, agents, or whoever was pulling it off, really, maybe it wasn't a real estate company, would then move the black family out after a year and say, yeah, we're going to be selling. Sorry. Thanks for being here. Then move a white family back in and mark the prices, mark the house up and sell it again, manipulating race politics to make money. We made those things illegal. Where are we today? We still have racially segregated neighborhoods. Chicago still votes based on race, and we want to do away with this. How do you do it? Class. Class is the issue. If the argument from the left is that these practices and systemic racism resulted in disproportionate negative impacts on minorities and not white people, the solution then, of course, is class-based benefits or class-based realignment. What I mean to say is instead of going to a racial group of people and pitting them against each other by offering one money and not the other, you simply say, if your income level is a certain level, we're going to, give you a tax break or something. Which, I mean, like, under a certain amount, maybe it should, it is tough. I don't have all the answers. But you do things that are class-based. Reparations for race? No, because then you go to the south side of Chicago and you give all the black people some kind of reparations, school or otherwise, that will increase their disposable income. Fact. And then you've got white neighbors who are poor and in gangs too, and they're going to be like, guess who's got money? You don't want to do that. That creates racial conflict. So you do it by class. You say like tax breaks, which we do with progressive tax systems. You say things like, based on class, we'll give you scholarships or get you into schools, although I don't think schools are the real answer. But changing the circumstances based on class instead of based on race. It's funny because that's more of like a Marxist view. The left, however, argues that this country is racist. What does that mean? It means they hate black people. No. Those families who fled, this is the funny thing. I knew a woman in New York. And she was a lefty as they come. She was super woke. She owned a building in Brooklyn. Her parents, so basically her family owned it, her parents owned it, and she managed and controlled it, and it was effectively hers. She made rent on it. And she was like, yeah, my parents got it for me. And she was Latina. And so I said, I got a question for you. Super woke, by the way, like legit. I said, if like the neighborhood you're in, like where you own the property is mostly white. If a black family moved next door to your building, would you sell? She goes, yes. And I started laughing. I was like, what? I was like, for real? I thought you were going to say no. And she was like, but my property value will go down. And I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me, dude? Wow. I don't know if that's so much the case these days, but these things really do exist. The problem is when the left says institutional racism stuff, it is a bunch of young, dumb people marching in lockstep who don't know how to solve the problems. And so you get people like Kendi who call for more racial discrimination. I'm like, yo, that makes the problem worse. I don't think the cop is racist. I think these cities are set up in a way where if a group of people here are black and a group of people here are white, there's going to be, and with historical wealth, there's going to be a disproportionate effect based on group A and group B, not race-based. Meaning, there are wealthy black people in New York who live in penthouses, okay? They're not suffering these ill effects the way my white friends on the south side of Chicago did. Race is not going to solve this. But it is true that these red line neighborhoods still exist. Even though we got rid of those laws, it still exists. So how do we deal with that? Tough question. We need revitalization efforts, in my opinion, in those areas and programs that help uplift based on class and not race. You don't go to the red line neighborhoods and say, okay, we're here to help black people. You go to a large swath of areas, including the red line areas, and say, we're going to do park revitalization. We're going to invest in schools. Again, I'm not so much sure the schools are the right answer, especially with all the Marxist stuff, but that's the path you go, in my opinion. And then you end up lifting people up based on class and giving them opportunity and training. Training's probably a much better answer. Opportunity in jobs. Give people something to lose. It's funny because it was the villain. I always get the movie number wrong. I think it was Fast 4. I don't remember. The villain is like this Latino guy, and he's like, I'm going to give these people all these things because then I own them. And I'm like, is that a bad thing? Is that a bad thing? You got a bunch of people who have nothing. There's a lot of crime. There's a lot of gangs. There's a lot of fighting. And you go to them and say, I'm going to give each and every one of you an opportunity. You will get these nice things from me. In exchange, you better not act out. And if you do, you get cut off. Now, there's a way to do it. There's a way not to do it. The left has this argument about paying criminals. I'm like, yo, that just makes people become criminals. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying that we want to create nice places. We want to fund police in these areas. And then we want to make it nice, and we want to tell people, don't mess this up. It's not easy to do, and I don't have all the answers, but it ain't based on race. It should be based on class. One problem I do see with all of this stuff is that even in Chicago, people still choose to live by the people of their same race. I don't know if you can solve for that. I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers, and I'm definitely not going to say that race doesn't play a role, but to clarify, genetics plays a role. So my point ultimately is this. You go to Thailand, guess what? Everybody's 5'7". You go to Sweden, guess what? Everybody's 6'2". Wow, it looks like there's a difference in genetics. Now, that's going to confer a whole lot of things. Taller people often have more success in sales. Shorter people, less likely to succeed there. This is going to create issues. But in that society where everyone's around the same height differences between them matter to each other. In Sweden, if you're 6 foot, you're short. Probably not really, but you get my point. Like a lot of people there are pretty tall. The reality is we are different based on our genetics. I don't know if skin color is ultimately the determining factor as opposed to just genetics in general, meaning there could be white dumb people and smart white people, and there could be smart black people and dumb black people, and there could be smart Mexican people and dumb Mexican people. So I think it's important to break it down. And the reason mostly for it is the left seems to be not smart enough to understand that differentiation. So they outright deny genetics and they play blank slate theory. But then you get many people in the white identitarian side who overplay genetics and think it's everything. And I'm like, dude, that ain't it. They'll look at stats, look at all the stuff, and say race. And I'll be like, okay, now hold on. You want to make an argument about a group of people who's proportionally committing more crime. We need to break down so much more than just the color of their skin. My point with that is someone who's black in the United States, they call African American, but someone who's white could be Italian, Irish, British, French, German. The same thing is true for black and Latino people, but they don't do that when the left calculates all this stuff, and the white identitarians too. I don't have the answers for you, my friends. I really, really don't. I don't know what else to tell you other than the Biden administration is really reaching with this one. The idea that because they don't want criminals working there, they're racist. Okay. I don't have solutions for you, dude. I really, really don't. It's more nuanced, but this is a stupid play. Whatever. I'll leave it there. What should I do? Should I put this one up at 1? Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.